This week's podcast is brought to you by Molecule Air Filters. Air pollution's a huge problem. Molecule destroys indoor pollutants and allergens at the molecular level. So if you have allergies, if you live in a city with bad air, if you're worried about your indoor air quality, which we all should be, I'd encourage you to check them out. Go to molecule.com, MOLEKULE.com, and get $75 off your first order by using coupon code LUCAS at checkout. Back in the late 1700s, the average American was consuming about 4 pounds of sugar per year. By the 1800s, that number more than quadrupled, 18 pounds per year. By the early 1900s, 90 pounds per year. And these days, people are consuming about 170 pounds per year. This is crazy. This is like 22 teaspoons of sugar every single day. And even the average American child is having like 135 grams, 32 teaspoons per day. So this is loads and loads of sugar. And this is just talking about sugar. I'm not referring to total carb load, which is completely off the charts in terms of refined flours and rice products and things like this. So what does this mean? Well, it means if you take a look at what we've done with our food system, we've done a really great job of combating starvation. In fact, all of the starvation projections are pretty amazing in terms of how quickly we're eradicating starvation around the world. It's a diminishing problem. It's diminishing faster than anyone could believe. We've done a really great job of feeding the planet food, especially starch, especially carbs, and especially sugar. We haven't done a really great job of nourishing the planet. And of course, mission number one is let's survive. But mission number two is let's thrive. Let's not worry so much about just lifespan. Let's see if we can worry about health span as well. And if you think about 170 pounds, 22 teaspoons of sugar, like almost 100 grams of sugar every single day. If you think about what that does, well, it's a toxin in your blood. And if you look at the worldwide rise in type 2 diabetes, it directly correlates. It tracks right alongside the growth of sugar. And if you look at countries that were slower to the sugar bandwagon, specifically in Asia, you see an even stronger correlation between the rise of sugar and the rise of type 2 diabetes. Right now, about 7% of the population in the world is diagnosed with diabetes, undiagnosed even more, pre-diabetes. Who knows? We're probably looking at 20-30% of the population, maybe even more, has elevated blood glucose level in kind of an early warning yellow light area. Nobody's really doing anything about it. In fact, the sugar consumption just continues to rise. People will buy these artificial sweeteners, which are not helpful, and then they consume more sugar in other forms, in various forms, all throughout the day. And it's a total disaster. When you look at different diets and different approaches to healthy eating, almost everybody focuses on dogma and different belief systems and paleo this and vegan that. And those are all interesting, and I'm interested in those too, and you are probably as well. But maybe more interesting is let's look at the big bad guy in the room, and that's sugar. It doesn't matter what dogma or what belief system or what ecosystem you're falling into. Sugar is a huge, huge problem. It's devastating to your health, your waistline. It's correlated with pretty much every degenerative illness you can imagine. On this week's show, we'll unpack specifically what that means, how to look at sugar, specifically why fructose in particular, fruit sugars, can be so detrimental. A lot of people don't realize this, and hopefully some suggestions on how you can start to get out of that trap. Hope you find this episode helpful. As always, your questions, comments, and feedback are most welcome. Email me podcast@yogabody.com. So hello and welcome everyone. Welcome to the Lucas Rockwood Show. Today's show is called Sugar is the Devil, and I'm joined here with Sarah Wilson. Sarah is the New York Times bestselling author of 15 different sugar books, which we'll get into. She was the founder of I Quit Sugar, which is now defunct, but sarahwilson.com is the new hub for all of her books. She has another book, which I didn't hear about until just today, which I'm excited to read as well, which hopefully we'll hear about, which is First We Make the Beast Beautiful, a book about anxiety. And all 15 of her Quit Sugar books are available on her website or on Amazon as well. Sarah, welcome to the show.
Oh, lovely to be here. Thank you.
So 15 different quitting sugar books. It's funny, I've been talking about sugar myself for a long time, but really heavily for the past couple of years. And it's kind of one of these things that I never realized struck such a chord. I always had a problem with sugar when I was younger. Well, not that much younger. 5 years ago, I had problems with sugar. And whenever I bring it up, suddenly people say, can you tell me more about that? So how did it happen for you? If I understand correctly, you had some issues with thyroid and other conditions. What was the kind of the trigger
That's right.
that pushed you over the edge?
Yeah. Well, I was working in magazines. I was the editor of Cosmopolitan Australia and had a fairly, intense job, a terrible relationship that was going south. And I developed an endocrinal disease, Hashimoto's, which is a thyroid disease. I'm sure many of your listeners either have it or know somebody with it. I got a particularly bad case of it, and I went down pretty bad. I got to the point where I couldn't walk, I couldn't work. I sort of lost everything in the process. And it's a disease that I think is on the increase, and it's very much related to sort of the A-type female condition. Predominantly women do get it, but men do as well. Now, I sort of looked into it. I spoke to endocrinologists, all different kinds of doctors. We tried different things. And one of the things that came up, quite often was, look, sugar's not great. We don't really know why, but it's not great for the thyroid. So maybe try to quit it. Now, the terribly cruel irony is that when you've got a endocrinal disease or any kind of inflammatory disease, you tend to have more of an addiction to sugar. So I had a very bad addiction. It was very seductive. I was eating what I thought was so-called healthy sugar. I was eating lots of granola with maple syrup, and I was eating my dark chocolate and my, wholesome muffins and so on, and lots of fruit juice. And I worked out that I was having around about close to 30 teaspoons of added sugar a day, one way or another. Now, we're meant to be eating between 6 and 9 teaspoons. That's what our bodies can handle. So I looked into all of this. I investigated it. I researched it. I tried quitting for 2 weeks, and it worked. It started to get results even within 2 weeks. And I just kept going and going. And I'm a journalist. I've been a journalist for almost 25 years, and I just researched. I went to conferences. I spoke at obesity get-togethers, and it developed into an ebook. It became an Amazon bestseller over in the US, and then I got it published as a print book, and it became a New York Times seller. It's in 113 countries around the world now, and it's an 8-week program, and I spent 2 years investigating it. So that's the history behind it, and that was in January 2011 that I quit sugar, and it just progressed and turned into a digital business, and 1.5 million people did my program before I closed it in May this year.
So thyroid conditions have been a hot button for a long time. It's kind of pop health circles. Everyone's got a thyroid problem. Nobody's got a thyroid problem. It's really confusing. So can you unpack some of those terms? So Hashimoto's is a term that you use, like your thyroid was underactive, or to, help people understand what's actually going on and what happens. Is your hair falling out? Are you tired? What's going on?
Yeah, Hashimoto's is an underactive or hypoactive as opposed to Graves' disease, which is sort of almost at the other end of the spectrum, which I had in my early 20s. And that's quite common that you can sort of swing from one to the other. So I had the underactive one, which means that my thyroid gland doesn't produce enough thyroid-stimulating hormone, and when we don't have enough thyroid hormone in our system, a whole range of endocrinal sort of issues appear. Every cell in our body has a receptor cell for vitamin D and the thyroid hormone. They're the only two hormones that interact with every single cell in our body. So when you've got Hashimoto's, you can have all kinds of symptoms. And I think I once counted 122 different symptoms that have actually been attributed to Hashimoto's. So in my case, I put on, now I've got to put it into pounds for your listeners. It was a significant amount of weight. I think from memory it was something like 40 pounds in a matter of weeks. My hair fell out, my nails fell off. As I said, I struggled to walk. I couldn't leave the house. I got incredibly depressed. I got insomnia. I was constantly cold, even in the middle of summer. And I then developed a whole range of other issues in my organs, and was essentially told that I was going through premature menopause. So I was 34 when I first got it, and was told I'd never be able to have children, which was, just a final nail in the coffin of, just the devastation at the time. So it was really interesting when I quit sugar, some of those initial symptoms. So I used to have this daily inflammation where my skin tingled and I was visibly swollen, in my, particularly my hands and my feet. And I had this burning sensation across my belly. And when I quit sugar, that immediately subsided. It was that noticeable. My skin improved, and this is the great thing about quitting sugar, is that your vanity can kick in those first 2 to 3 weeks when it's really hard, because your skin, actually, the elastin and collagen kicks into gear within 2 weeks. So pimples and wrinkles really back off. And that's the thing that people notice the most. Sometimes they do it for weight loss or for a particular illness. The skin is something that really, really keeps you motivated and makes you want to keep on going and going. But yeah, within a couple of months, I was really being able to train again. I was back at yoga. I was building up my strength. And I lost all of that weight and went back to the weight that I was previously. And the improvements kept on going and going. And so much so that cut to 8 years later, I fell pregnant, which went, against everything. All the doctors said. They said I'd never be able to have children. All my hormones had disappeared, and unfortunately I miscarried because I was, 42 by this stage. But yeah, I managed to reverse all of my blood markers that categorised my illness at the time. And I really do put it down to predominantly the diet changes that came about from quitting sugar.
People get really confused between correlation and causation. And so, elevated blood glucose, blood sugar problems, blood sugar metabolism problems, they're correlated with just about everything. But very few people get that advice. So if they go into a doctor with an endocrine imbalance, if they go in with a thyroid problem, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's pretty rare that a doctor will go after sugar. Or was that an approach that your doctor took? I'm not sure.
No, you're absolutely right, especially in the endocrinal kind of medical realm. It's a very traditional part of science or medicine. And for very few endocrinal doctors, if you've got one that is onto it, then you're really lucky. I did my own investigation. So I looked into it, went down the rabbit hole of the internet, which was all fairly new back then, I've got to say, sort of going on to online to investigate your own health issues, because of course this is, quite some time ago. But you're absolutely right. However, in the time that I've been working in this area, what was hypothesis, and as you say, correlation, it has now rolled out over the years, and some of it's become gold standard science, and which is very rare in nutritional studies, as you'd know, and many of your listeners would know. So the links between illnesses, between sugar and, for instance, obesity, diabetes or type 2 diabetes, but even ADHD, Alzheimer's, pancreatic cancer and a bunch of other cancers. These are all sort of what are considered metabolic diseases and quite modern diseases. The correlation was there because what we saw was the increase in obesity and all these diseases occurred at exactly the same rate as our increase in the consumption of sugar. And so that sent off alarm bells for a lot of people. But then the science has started to roll in, and, literally every month there's a new headline with a certified, with a really decently published study making the connection. So I think now doctors really give it some credence. Now the WHO came out as well and has really kind of spoken out and given new recommendations on sugar, as has the American Heart, I think it's called Foundation over there, or Association, and they've also moderated and changed their sugar recommendations to the 6 to 9 teaspoons that I worked to from the beginning. 6 teaspoons for women, 9 teaspoons for men, and 3 teaspoons for children. That's what our bodies can handle to maintain good health, and for our liver to be able to process what is essentially a toxin in our system. So yes, you are right, but the shift is starting to happen because the science is there and the big organisations are recognising it.
And when you say quit sugar, what does that mean to you? Because I always just lump everything in because, I'd work with people and I'd say, you got to quit sugar. And they'd say, I don't eat any sugar. And then you look at what they're eating and they're eating various forms of starch and honey and all kinds of different things throughout the day. And
and maple syrup. And
so whether it's fructose or glucose or whatever,
Exactly. So this is the elevator spiel that I've managed to fine-tune over the years. So when we're talking about sugar, so everyday table sugar is sucrose, which is 50% glucose, 50% fructose. Glucose is great stuff. We need it. It's in most of our foods, and we metabolize it very efficiently in our cells as energy, throughout the day. Fructose is the problematic element, and it is very similar to alcohol in the way it's metabolized in the body and other toxins. It's metabolized predominantly by our liver. So it's not used by our cells as energy in the same way. It's predominantly metabolized in our liver. Now, that places a huge load on our liver. If we eat a small amount of sugar, 50% fructose, our liver can kind of process it. So if you're eating whole fruit, say an apple or an orange, sort of as a snack or after a meal, absolutely fine. Our body can handle it. That's what we were evolved to do. And it processes it, and largely fructose is stored as fat around the liver, the visceral fat. And a little bit of that, our body can handle. We process it. Now, what the problem is that we have huge amounts of sugar in large dumpings. So an apple is about 2 teaspoons of sugar, and it's the same stuff, whether it's in sugar cane or an apple or a can of Coke, right? Our body doesn't tell the difference once it's a molecule in our body. So when we have it as a juice form, it's highly problematic, or in liquid form of any sort, whether it's Coke or apple juice. So if you take a glass of apple juice and a glass of Coke, exactly the same size, they contain the same amount of sugar. And you're talking, let's say 3, like a standard can of Coke and equal amount of apple juice, you're talking about 9 teaspoons of sugar. Now, that exceeds the daily amount for most of us. And what's even worse is that you drink sugar super fast. It's not like you're chewing it with fibre to slow it down into your stomach and through your system. It can hit your whole system within minutes. Our liver freaks out and does what it should do. It protects the organs by storing it in our fat cells around our organs. And as we know, that visceral fat is the hardest to get rid of, and it's the most problematic for metabolic diseases. So when I'm talking about sugar, I'm really sort of talking about fructose, but it wasn't going to be a sexy book title, was it? I quit the fructose half of the sugar molecule, but we consume most of our fructose via everyday table sugar. Now, people say, well, what about honey? It's about 45% fructose. Maple syrup, around about 35 to 40% fructose. Problem with these kinds of foods is that because we think they're healthy, we eat large amounts of it. So you sit down to pancakes, people will pour half a cup of maple syrup onto their pancakes. You'd never dump half a cup of sugar onto your pancakes. So that's a big part of these so-called healthy sugars. And people say, they're natural. Well, no more natural than sugarcane, which is where, in Australia at least, and some of your sugar over in the US comes from. And then agave, which I know was very fashionable in health food stores, and I think still is around the world, that's around about 70 to 90% fructose. It's highly problematic. And then, of course, there's the farming practices and some issues there as well. So I always advise avoiding agave. It's terrible stuff. And in fact, I often say to people, health food stores are often the unhealthiest places to go and get a snack because they are so dripping in sugar. And then you start talking about dried fruits, such as dates, which a lot of the big power bars contain. Have a look at the back of the nutritional panel and have a look how much sugar is in there. With a date, I've looked at them and they're sweetened with dates, and there'll be more sugar in those things than a Mars bar. And that's across the board. I am yet to find too many sort of, power health bars that have a small amount of sugar in them. So, then, of course, when we're talking low-fat foods, which the world isn't inundated with, they contain very high levels of sugar because when you take the fat out, you've got to replace it with something for both flavour but also what's called fullness of mouth, which is the texture. And so manufacturers, and particularly in dairy foods like yogurt, they put a lot of sugar in there in the low-fat versions. And in fact, even low-fat milk contains more sugar. So pig farmers, for instance, will feed their pigs low-fat milk to fatten them up. That's a true fact. So there's a lot of confusion. There is a lot of confusion. And, as you pointed out, a lot of people get really confused as to what's sugar and what's not sugar.
The confusion between high fructose corn syrup just really speaks to the way that mainstream media and these different health boards can totally brainwash people. The general consensus is that high fructose corn syrup is bad and that table sugar is less bad, and maple syrup and honey are wonderful. It's like if you actually start to
Yeah.
look, or that agave is amazing. And if you start to actually look at this, I always say that agave is like tequila without the alcohol. It's like there's no, you don't get tipsy, so it doesn't slow you down, right? So you just keep going. And I like that you bring that up, because that's exactly the same thing I always say. If you look at the effects of a high fructose diet, the effects are very similar to if that agave was tequila or mezcal. Fatty liver disease, elevated triglycerides, that visceral fat around the abdomen, it's very, very noticeable and measurable, and it's fast. It happens really fast. And so, you walk in these health food stores, and you get some granola bar that's organic and natural, and it's just like this fructose bomb. It's loaded with agave, it's made with oats, it's, maybe 65 grams of carbohydrates, negligible fat and protein to slow down the absorption. So you're just getting hit with this stuff. And again, people look at it, and I get mad too, because a lot of this stuff is like, they're even able to label it in different countries. In my country, for example, they're able to label a lot of stuff as no added sugar. And they're just, they're just a big date ball, or it's just a big fructose ball. I know.
It's terrible that it's allowed, and people are, they're playing on people's confusion. It's the other issue is that the snack industry is highly problematic. It's part of the 8-week program, which your listeners can still do via the ebooks and also the print books that are available in the stores all across America. Is that we basically train the body to eat 3 times a day instead of the constant grazing. Now, you and your listeners are probably well aware of this. Snacking was only kind of invented, quote unquote, in the early 1990s, when dietitians and nutritionists were presented with all these clients who had horrible blood sugar problems. They were riding on a roller coaster all day because they were eating sugar. And so what they did is, and they couldn't get from breakfast to lunch without having to snack on something or, eat a whole heap of sugar. And so these dietitians said, all right, well, listen, why don't you split up your meals across 5 to 6 day, meals and eat small meals throughout the day. Now, that was a Band-Aid fix for people with a sugar, it was pre-diabetes. That was what was prescribed, but it got rolled out. And, of course, how does it play out in, neoliberal capitalism? Food manufacturers caught on to it and, of course, produced a whole snack industry, which was full of, sugar. So everyone's got this kind of idea that you don't eat a good, decent breakfast with heaps of protein and fat like all the generations before us used to eat. You eat sort of a sugary, sort of light breakfast, and then you go and you snack throughout the day. Nobody snacks on carrot sticks and almonds. Nobody, right? You might for a week when you're being virtuous, but eventually people go, oh gosh, I haven't got a snack. I'll go to a health food store and buy one of these date bombs, and that's the pattern that we're all in. We are riding a sort of sugar roller coaster all throughout the day. And the way I describe it, and it's a really good metaphor, and people tend to kind of click with it, when you're eating a meal with protein and fat and vegetables and a small amount of carbohydrates, it's like the equivalent of throwing a log onto your metabolic fire.
Air pollution is a huge and growing problem, not just in mega cities like Shanghai and Beijing, but also in beautiful, clean air-looking cities like Barcelona, where I live. We still have a big problem with air pollution. A lot of people are turning to HEPA filters. HEPA filters are kind of the industry standard, but they're not the best. This new technology, these molecule filters, they destroy indoor air pollutants at the molecular level, so they completely remove them from the air you breathe. Molecule filters use something called photoelectrochemical oxidation, or PECO for short. It's nanotechnology that eliminates allergens, mold, bacteria, viruses, and airborne chemicals. It'll destroy pollutants that are 1,000 times smaller than your typical HEPA filter, so it's just a better way to filter air. One customer using molecule filters said that she was even able to breathe through her nose for the first time in 15 years. So obviously, these filters are really working for people. To get $75 off your first order and to learn more, visit molecule.com, MOLEKULE, molecule.com, and enter the coupon code LUCAS at checkout.
It's like the equivalent of throwing a log onto your metabolic fire. And so it burns nice and solidly and evenly for about, 5 hours, and then starts to die out, you get hungry, and then you eat another proper meal. What we're doing in our culture is we're keeping the fire burning, but it's the equivalent of throwing kind of paper and kerosene onto the fire every kind of hour or so as we snack with these sugary foods. And sure, it keeps the fire burning, but it's up and down, and we've got to tend to it. We've got to be vigilant and keep our bodies from crashing, and it's really about retraining your body to sort of really kind of eat a proper meal and to keep that sustained energy through to the next mealtime. And that's what our bodies are trained to do. That is when we're in optimal health, is when we have those kind of hormones, the leptin and the ghrelin, being triggered by the right foods. And that's the other thing that I teach people in the program, is that the real problem with fructose, yes, it causes all of these health issues, but what is the fundamental issue as to why we're so addicted to it and we can't stop eating it, is that it shuts down and deregulates our appetite hormones. So the ghrelin and leptin hormones, which regulate our hunger and our satiation, are switched off. So that's why we can eat a whole tub of ice cream, a whole packet of Oreos, a litre or, a quart of Coca-Cola when we go to cinema. We can eat all that. Try to eat that much, sort of cheese, or, try to eat that much yogurt in one sitting. You can't, because the fat and the protein switch on the right hormones and tell you when you're full. We have no off switch for fructose. And so that's why we can eat so much of it. We keep eating it. We're programmed to keep eating it because evolutionarily it was the fastest and most effective source of fat on the planet. It still is. Back in caveman days, when we'd come across a berry bush or a honey hive, it really served us well to be able to have no off switch for it, and to be able to binge on it, to be absolutely obsessed by it, because it was a great source of fat, and we never knew when we'd get another injection of it. We don't have that problem today, but we still have the same, hormonal system. So yes, I think I've diverted. I can't even remember what your question was, Lucas. I really go off on the tangent.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you pointed that out, because a lot of people don't realize, what I always tell people is fructose, and all forms of sugar, but especially fructose, is one of the least satiating things you can eat, which means it just doesn't turn off your hunger hormones. It doesn't trigger that leptin response, that ghrelin response. And just anecdotally, I always tell people, imagine there's a giant bowl of mangoes in front of you. There's no limit. I've eaten 8 mangoes when I lived in Thailand, 8 mangoes in one go. You feel completely fine. And now imagine that you just eat, let's go back to your almond and carrot example. You're so done. It's just impossible to keep eating those high starch or high fiber rather, or high protein, high fat foods. So you have this fructose, which is it doesn't satiate you at all, and so you're not full. And the other thing people don't realize is one of the most lipogenic things you can eat. So like you said, it turns into fat, and not just fat, but belly fat, really, really fast.
Yeah.
And for people who want to experience this, switch out your sugars and go for agave. Like, people notice when they switch to agave, they notice like a muffin top, they notice a squishy belly. Like, it happens. Exactly. It happens quick. Like you said, this is an evolutionary thing. This is designed to store fat. There's nothing wrong with storing fat in a normal environment where your metabolic health is strong and you're storing fat, burning fat, storing fat, burning fat. But when you're, like me, 40 years into a life.
And when you've got to actually climb a tree over a mountaintop to get hold of your sugar, that's the other thing. We don't have to expend any energy. But the muffin top thing is a really interesting thing, because women in particular can sort of go for the sweet option at breakfast. They'll avoid the bacon and eggs, and they'll go for the granola or the massive fruit platter with the sweetened yogurt. What we see is a generation, and this was occurring when I was the editor of Cosmo, the muffin top was a new term, and it was a phenomenon that just started to take off. And we're talking 15 years ago now. And so we were just seeing all these women, and it was called the fat skinny, or the thin fat, or I can't remember what it's called now. But it was where these women have skinny fat, and they've got the thin limbs, so skinny little arms and legs, but there's this kind of really big middle, sort of an apple-type middle, and that's from sugar. It's the equivalent of the male beer gut. That's essentially what it is. And so fashion changed. Back in that era, it was all about these baby doll dresses, that sort of covered up from sort of the breast line to the hips. And we have various kind of versions of that sort of fashion, and ways of sort of getting around what has happened to our bodies as a result of a high sugar diet.
Yeah, it's really a big problem. And so here's the other problem that I see though. People go off sugar. So they quit sugar, they listen to a show like this, and they throw out the honey, they throw out the date sugar, whatever they have in the kitchen, they throw it all out. And then what I see people doing is right away they just make up for that with other forms of high glycemic foods. So suddenly they're secretly really interested in noodles, and suddenly, bread is sneaking into every single meal. Your body's really clever, and it very quickly finds other sources. I'll often see people, suddenly they're interested in almond milk, and guess what's in that almond milk? A whole lot of sugar often, They find that your body's really good at just laser beaming, finding things that, it remembers from 2 years ago when you had that little drink of nut milk or something that there was a bunch of sugar in there, and suddenly you're interested.
Right. Yeah.
So how do you think about this? Because I hear people all the time, they say, I quit sugar, I did it, nothing's happening, I'm not losing weight, not feeling better, this sugar thing doesn't matter, it's not working. How do you help people think about this a little more?
My number one thing, and we educated people around the world on this, and my books explain it and talk everyone through it very, very clearly. You have to embrace fat. So fat becomes your friend because it is the thing that will stop you from wanting to go and eat those kinds of foods. And, it really is like I try to educate in an equally seductive way in and around the notion of eating these foods that contain really good quality fats and proteins. And it's, we turn to the French way of eating. Embrace cheese, embrace these kinds of, lots of olive oil and be fine with butter. So I spent years and years, just showing people this through my recipes and reminding people. So we had, 24/7 sort of customer service people, and the question was often, what do I do? I've got a sugar craving. And we'd say, well, have you been eating the right amount of oil on the meals, on the program? And they'd go, oh, no, I've been skipping it. And we're like, well, go and stick it back on, It works. It works. Like, it doesn't sound particularly sexy. It doesn't sound like a silver bullet, but it is. Like, that is how our bodies work. It's what they will respond to. You don't even have to think about it because the hormones will do the job for you. And you'll find yourself getting through a day and you'll go, you know what? I did not eat any crappy food all day. Now, the other big thing is, and this is my sort of harsh line kind of comment, is, you know what? You've got to learn to cook. It's kind of non-negotiable. 80 to 90% of processed foods that come in a packet, contain added sugar. And as we mentioned at the beginning of this program, it's impossible to find out exactly what's in it a lot of the time. So the best thing you can do is avoid processed food, and then you'll be avoiding most of the sugar on the planet. Now, that means you've then got to cook, and you've got to eat real food, and you've got to cook it. And it doesn't have to be complicated. We've got a whole generation who think you've got to make these fancy meals. No, you really don't have to. You can learn to cook in a particular way, which gets right down to meat and 3 veg, basically. And if you're vegetarian or vegan, there's many, many ways to get around that. So it's a real, I sort of just say to people, sorry, it's non-negotiable. You want to look after your health, learn to cook. I'm often asked, what's your number one health advice, And I say, learn to cook, because it means you cut out all of that stuff. It's just, and if you're eating out at, I've got a whole heap of tips in my books on how to eat out at, restaurants and at food courts and all of that kind of thing. There are tricks, and you just start to learn them. And it just becomes the way of life. And the great thing is, well, there's 2 things. As I said, your hormones just kick in and do their job. You don't have to think about it. It becomes a lot less hard than you think. And then the other thing is, and this is actually quite wonderful, when you reverse your sugar habit, you can actually reverse a lot of the health problems that came with it. And I'm talking really big ones, like, for instance, infertility, people with endometriosis, a whole range of things, cholesterol issues. They all start to heal. And I'm not saying immediately, and I'm not saying people should come off their medication straight away. But this has been proven. Now, when you're talking about toxic oils, your trans fats, the damage is generally permanent. So it's quite a wonderful thing. It's not like it's a waste of your time. Making these switches will actually make real inroads into your health. But yes, good fats are the way to go. Good fats and proteins and cooking. They're my 3 solutions.
The cooking thing, it's a really common thing. I mean, people all the time will say, I don't cook, ha ha ha. Sort of such a strange thing to do. It's sort of like saying,
like a badge of honor, yeah.
Yeah, it's like I piss away my money or I neglect my spouse. It's like that, like health, wealth, relationships, like all those things are important. You'd never say like, I don't do anything for my significant other. You know, it's like, wow, good luck with not cooking. It's not going to work. Like this food is mostly bad. It's mostly bad. And I mean, I owned and operated health food restaurants. And even health food restaurants, I would mostly not eat at. I mean, you can get away with it here and there, but like you mostly have to prepare your own food. It just doesn't work. Like restaurants commercially don't work. It's a really bad model.
Oils, dressing.
Yeah.
And they're large quantities of them, and they do horrible, horrible things. Yeah.
The other thing I just always recommend people do is they just can't get their head around this sugar thing, and so they're convinced they quit sugar, and suddenly they're getting it from other secret sources. And so I just encourage people to, number one, get a blood glucose monitor, because that is the simplest, cheapest way you can actually see, and people assume that their fructose isn't hitting their blood glucose, and it totally is. Check out that number when you wake up in the morning. 90% of the people listening are going to have an elevated fasting blood glucose. And the other thing is, if people want to go a little deeper, get a DEXA scan. And DEXA scans are not imperfect. They're not amazing. But when you see that visceral fat that's around your liver, and you start, and then you see your fasting blood glucose level, and you just start to look at not just two people on the internet talking, but you start to look at your own body and your own metrics, and really clearly you can see like this is affecting you, and you start to just sort of, game plan out the next 10 years. Like the path is not good, and who knows where it'll go. It might not have showed up as weight gain for you. Maybe it'll show up as dementia. Maybe it'll show up as kidney stones. Who knows what it's going to show up as. But like you just don't get away with it over time. It's going to come back to get you.
And you can reverse it. I mean, I've actually worked with a university here, Sydney University, where they tested my program, and they ran the experiment for 9 months. So, the program runs for only two months, 8 weeks, but they continued with the participants in the study, and they used the DEXA scanner, and what they observed was radical shifts within 2 months in visceral fat, in a whole range of the markers. And, of course, I think the DEXA scans give you a sort of biological age, don't they?
Yeah.
Literally these people were all 10, 15 years over their biological age, and they dropped it significantly. I know for myself that my biological age is something like 8 years under what I am, based on the fact that I don't eat sugar. It's quite interesting. As you say, it's not exact, but it will give you a little bit of a picture of where you're at.
Sarah, I love your message and the work that you're doing. I know a lot of our listeners, especially this time of the year, they're going to want to pick up your books and follow your work. Where's the best place that we should send them?
If you go to sarahwilson.com, you'll see the books page. It'll take you to my digital bookstore. But if you want to buy hard copies of particularly the first book, which is called I Quit Sugar, the 8-Week Program, that's in most bookstores across the US. Try Amazon. I know it's certainly there. And then you'll see a series of other books that are available there as well. A big, whopping great book of over 300 recipes if you're after just the recipes, so that you can start cooking. But sarahwilson.com is probably the best place to start.
Sarah, thanks so much for what you're doing, and let's keep in touch for the future. Back in 2005 and 2006, I was running and eventually owning a yoga studio, and we had a big problem. We needed to staff up. We needed to hire more teachers, and we just couldn't find qualified applicants. Literally, we would put out a job ad, we'd interview a bunch of people, and most quote-unquote certified teachers just couldn't teach a good class. So we started in-house trainings. In fact, my first 2 courses, there was no paying people at all. We actually sponsored people to take the course, and we hired them, and they became teachers, many of whom are still teachers today, all these years later. And in 2006, we opened up our first course to the public and started training professional teachers, and we used this same approach. The idea was we want people job ready by the end of the course so that we can hire them, or that somebody can hire them. And interestingly enough, this was one of the only courses in the world that was actually training professional teachers. Most yoga courses, you sing some songs, you eat some lentils, and you get a certificate. At our course, you actually learn professional skills, public speaking, applied anatomy, nutrition, physiology, all of the skills that local yoga students are looking for. That's why our graduates are among the highest paid, most employed, most successful teachers in the world. This year we have our 4,000th graduate completing our programs, and it's one of the things that brings me the most joy in all the work that I do. We have a bunch of programs I'd encourage you to check out if you're thinking about becoming a yoga teacher in 2019, and all of them can be found at yogateacherscollege.com, yogateacherscollege.com/calendar to see all of our upcoming events. We have courses as short as 1 week and as long as 6 months, and we even have online training programs for those of you who can't travel to train with us. Hope that's helpful, and I look forward to talking with you more and hopefully training with you sometime in the future here in the upcoming year. We have a nutritional question from Peter this week, and Peter says, "Hey Lucas, I listened to your old episode about iron and the lucky iron fish. I ordered an iron fish for my house, but now I'm not sure if I should use it. As a 46-year-old man, I'm not sure if my iron levels are low or high or if it's safe to supplement with iron. I've heard that too much iron can cause just as many problems as too little iron. What should I do?" So the quick answer, Peter, is go get your blood tested. That's the right thing to do. The cool thing about the lucky iron fish, and check out lucky iron fish if you just put it in Google or go to yogabody.com and type in lucky iron fish, and the show will come up. It's a cool show and a cool interview. It's a cool company. They sell these iron fish that basically last you forever. You stick it in your, I think it's $20 or something. It lasts forever. You stick it in your kitchen, and you can throw it in a pot of soup, for example, and it'll make your soup iron rich. And for everyone you buy, they give away a fish to the developing and emerging economies of the world. Last time I talked to them, I believe they were working in Cambodia specifically. I think they've expanded to a bunch of other countries. So first and foremost, iron deficiency is a huge problem. Billions of people, like 2 billion people, something like that. So it's a big problem. People often say supplements don't work. Well, the World Health Organization would take issue with that. They clearly work. If you're deficient in iron and you take iron supplements, it can radically change your life and the life of all of your descendants. Same thing with vitamin A. You're deficient in vitamin A, maybe you'll go blind, maybe take a couple of pills and maybe you won't go blind. So supplements, not only do they work, they're life-saving, and in many cases they're absolutely transformative for communities and generations of people. And things like iron can be that transformative, and in areas where things are so iron poor, where people are living almost exclusively off of rice, for example, it can really be a game changer. That said, in the developed world as well, even in wealthy countries, anemia is pretty common, and this happens because people have nutritional imbalances. So while they might be eating plenty of iron-rich foods, whether it's from things like beans and spinach or red meat or whatever it is, they might not have the cofactors necessary to actually absorb that iron. B vitamins are a common one that are lacking. And so they're eating iron, but it's not going in. Probably everyone listening knows someone who's been anemic at one point or another. It's really common. So what do you do when you're anemic? What do you do? A lot of times when women get pregnant, they get their blood levels tested, and this is very common during pregnancy. People have low levels of iron. It's risky. What should you do? Well, people will tell you anyone who's been on iron supplements hates them. In fact, this is why if you go to the vitamin section in your local store, you will see lots of iron-free multivitamins, because people hate iron. It feels like you just swallowed a bunch of gravel and it lasts for like 6 or 8 hours. Most people cannot handle supplementing iron. There's a couple of companies that have tried little tricks. Liquid-based iron are some of the more popular prenatal iron supplements. This Lucky Iron Fish is one that I really like. The only thing I can't speak to is the efficacy and the dosing and the safety. It seems pretty variable, meaning did I add lemon? Did I cook it long enough? I'm not really sure. So I think your question is a valid one, Peter. I also have one of these Lucky Iron Fish, and I use it irregularly. I've never had a problem with iron levels or anemia, and I do get my blood tested regularly. They're always in the safe and healthy range, lucky me. And I still like to use this Lucky Iron Fish once in a while. I'll throw it in a pot of soup just to make it iron rich. I'm not eating liver or anything like that, so I think once in a while to give myself a little hit of iron is probably a good idea. What do people do? So when they get anemic, people will be given supplements by their doctor or recommended a multivitamin. And sometimes people will do things like eat really iron-rich foods like chicken liver, for example. Kind of disgusting, but it's a common one that people will go to. In terms of you and what you should do for your family, the short answer is get tested. Like vitamin D, overdoing iron can be a really bad thing. Now, on the vitamin D side, almost everybody's deficient. So I've yet to meet somebody who overdid it with supplementing. It's usually the other way around. But iron, you can absolutely overdo it, and you will feel it. You'll have black stools and a lead belly, and you will not feel good. So, Peter, I've talked a lot, but I don't know if I've really given you an answer. I think iron is obviously a really crucial nutrient, but it's kind of one that you need to test. So I'd encourage you and the rest of your family to get some blood work and then decide accordingly. And also think about the way that you're eating. I eat just plants, and so for me, I don't have a lot of great sources of iron. There's plenty of plant-based sources, but they aren't as absorbable as, say, liver or red meat or something like this. So for me, adding a little bit of iron now and then makes quite a bit of sense. For a premenopausal woman, also, there's an argument to be made that eating more iron-rich foods and or supplementing with something natural-ish, like a Lucky Iron Fish, could be a good way to go. I would encourage you to follow the company. Lucky Iron Fish, it's a cool company. They put out quite a bit of research, and you can learn a lot from that show we did, and also from the work that they're doing. They're quite active online. I really like what they're doing. Hope that's helpful, Peter. We have a question here from Mary this week. Mary says, I just listened to your podcast. The more I learn from you, the more inspired I am. Thank you. 2 things. I would value your feedback on how to correct dark circles, puffiness around the eyes. You touched on this briefly in the podcast, and I was left knowing that you could help. This has been an ongoing problem for me. My dad has it as well, yet I'm motivated to stop this circle thing. You touched on nutritional deficiency. I am ready to correct this. So a couple of things to think about. I've had this problem a bunch of times in my life too, Mary, and I've had to admit that I just don't sleep enough. And so this is the stereotypical response. But if you're not getting enough sleep, your eyes will just be puffy and dark, and there's no way around it. I spent a bunch of time trying to figure out what it was, and for me, that's what it was. But there are 2 other things to think about. Certainly, vitamin and mineral deficiencies can be at play, but even more common are elevated blood glucose levels. And the classic one is like a low iron deficiency. If you're low in iron, rather, you can see dark circles. If you ever go to like vegetarian festivals and things like this, there's a slightly higher percentage of iron deficiencies there, and a bunch of people who are breaditarians, they're living off wheat. And I used to exhibit and make food and stuff for these kind of events. So I saw a bunch of this, and I kind of investigated because I said, why are all these people trying to be so healthy? Why are they all walking around with dark circles? 2 reasons. Slightly higher low iron. Low iron's pretty common just in general, but slightly higher in the vegetarian community. And then you have this very, very common elevated blood glucose levels, which will cause glycation. It'll cause those dark circles underneath your eyes. So here's what I would suggest. First of all, go get some comprehensive blood work done. Check out your B12 level. That's related to your iron absorption as well. Sometimes you're eating enough iron, but you're not absorbing it. So I'd go check out your ferritin levels, check out your B12 levels, talk to your doctor and say, hey, listen, I'm showing some signs here. I would like to take a look. In terms of your dad having it as well, there's 2 things. We certainly do inherit things from our parents, but we often inherit lifestyle things even more than genetics. What I mean by that is the breakfast that your dad eats is probably pretty similar to yours. The sleeping habits are probably similar to yours. So the lifestyle inherited stuff is even more common than the genetic stuff in terms of causing this. So I would take a look. But the biggest offenders that I see when I'm talking to people, the biggest one for sure is elevated blood glucose. The way to think about this, what this does to your body, if you take an apple and you cut the apple in half and you let it sit there, that oxidative damage, the way that apple turns brown, that glycation effect, this is very similar to what happens to your skin, and it can cause that very thin skin underneath your eyes to become more translucent and to show darker. So that's something to take a look at. Puffy eyes, very often related to elevated blood glucose. All of these things are very easy to manage. None of these things your doctor will be very motivated to deal with, because none of these are flashing red lights. These are all just hum-de-dum, nothing too special. The doctor is seeing broken legs and heart attacks and all kinds of serious things. They're not super worried about your dark circles. So you need to come in armed with some good questions. Question is, check my B12, check my ferritin, let's do an A1C so I can take a look at how my 3-month blood glucose is doing, and let's make sure that I'm getting sufficient sleep. Next one, second part of the question. Your challenges are exciting. Really missed out on doing the HIP challenge. We did this 21-day HIP challenge recently. Would we be able to do it after the fact? I would encourage you, Mary, and everyone else listening, if you want to see our upcoming challenges. We're doing these video-based challenges on Instagram. They're really cool. Go to yogateacherscollege.com/calendar, yogateacherscollege.com/calendar. You'll see all of our upcoming challenges. We have a backbend challenge. We have a sugar detox challenge. We have a hip opening challenge. They're really, really simple. You don't need any software. You just pop open your phone and boom, off you go. You can talk to me, send me videos and messages back and forth. It's been really fun. We've been connecting with people all around the world. So thanks for your question, Mary. Hope that's helpful.
This week's iTunes review is by Bein Macherin from Germany. Sandra says, I enjoy Lucas Rockwood's show, usually on a walk. I like his calm approach to topics and the broad variety of subjects he covers. He chooses his guests well, and they add their own idea to each topic. Greetings from Germany. Thank you, Sandra. You have won the Yoga Trapeze. Email us at podcast@yogabody.com and we will ship it to you.
Breathing is one of the fastest and most powerful ways you can affect your nervous system, the pH of your blood, even your endocrine system. It's really dramatic how quickly you can impact your body, but most people don't understand it. If you go to yoga classes, the teacher just says, breathe deeply, breathe slowly. And we don't really understand what that means. I got really frustrated with this, so I put together a guide for you, my podcast listeners. Go to yogabody.com/how to breathe. Yogabody.com/how to breathe. You put in your email, and I'll give you this PDF. It shows you exactly how to do water, whiskey, and coffee breathing. These 3 specific practices, which all breathing falls into one of these 3 categories. Check it out. Let me know what you think. Yogabody.com/how to breathe.